We'll go ahead and open our meeting, and Representative Harden, if you'll open us with a prayer, please.
Let us pray. Father in heaven, we come to you this morning in prayer just to praise your holy name. Father, thank you for your many blessings toward us, and to ask you for your leadership in the matters that we will discuss this morning. Father, this committee looks at your environment that you've so blessed us with, and we thank you for that. Ask for your blessings as we proceed. These things we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you. Today we'll have overviews from both the DNR and from EPD. Our subcommittees will begin their meetings next week, so if you want to be on our email list, just notify our office. Also, we will post our meetings on the bulletin board outside our office. So thank you, and Commissioner, it's your show. What we'll do is, for our committee, they'll have a brief presentation, and we'll have a brief amount of time for questions, because we're going to also get to EPD, but y'all are available afterwards for questions, right? Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As a former member, it's great to be before the best committee in state government. I'd like to take a few minutes and talk about what has been going on in DNR over the last year and highlight some of the work that this team has accomplished. For starters, HB 208, which I thank y'all very much for passing last year, has allowed our Wildlife Resources Division to increase the sale of hunting and fishing license to the Southeast average, which was the first increase in 25 years. The revenue brought in from this increase is on pace with our projections and will allow us to do things like open more roads on public lands and improve wildlife habitat and increase fish production. In addition, we are also using the funds in our law enforcement division, where we are hiring new game wardens to fill some of the vacancies in more than 40 counties. You all know Georgia's coastline is a valuable asset to our state as well. Our Coastal Resources Division is dedicated to preserving the beauty of Georgia's 100 miles of coastline and marshes, and is committed to educating the public on the importance of this unique feature of our state. I recently appointed a new director, Doug Haymans, to replace the now retired Spud Woodward. If you don't already know Doug, I know you'll love getting to know him and enjoy working with him. We also have invested more than $20 million in FY 2017 into our state parks, which last year alone attracted 8.9 million visitors and supported more than 8,600 jobs. All in all, this has led to a nearly $1 billion with a B economic impact for the state of Georgia. The DNR is also tasked with helping to preserve Georgia's rich history and cultural resources. Georgia is currently home to more than 84,000 properties listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Last year, HPD staff conducted over 3,000 environmental reviews of federal projects as part of a consultation process to help agencies comply with the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. That's just a quick rundown of our divisions, but my favorite part about leading DNR is being able to work alongside the best team in Georgia. In fact, in many ways, the DNR is one large family. When a crisis strikes, there is no one I would trust more to protect Georgia's natural resources, and most importantly, its people. Last year, you may recall, I updated you on our response to Hurricane Matthew. This year, a larger, more powerful Hurricane Irma struck our state. Since Matthew, we began implementing incident command system training across our department, and over 200 of our employees have gone through that program. If you would let me, I'd like to take a minute to share with you a video highlighting the DNR's efforts and responses during the storm.
The days leading up to Irma, we're like every other Georgian. We're watching the news.
Tracking Hurricane Irma as it moves closer to making landfall in the U.S.
They started making their predictions.
Let's get that update on Hurricane Irma.
The sheer, unrelenting force of Hurricane Irma.
Life-threatening storm surge expected.
The afternoon, everything shifting toward the northward and then gradually losing strength.
Irma had an impact statewide. The track kept changing. Part of the DNR's job is to be there before, during, and after the storm. And that's exactly what we did. The most important resource DNR offers during severe weather is our staff and our personnel. We train every day with Mother Nature and her elements, and so we're uniquely qualified to react to these storms.
What those skill sets can mean for responding to an event, whether you be with state parks, with lodging, law enforcement division, wildlife resources division, biologists, technicians in the field.
Our historic preservation division, they have to come in and assess historic assets after these issues. In an emergency, sometimes things can get chaotic, and the leader that we designated may not be there.
And one thing we kept hearing from our personnel was provide better training or more training to be able to better respond.
Critical incident management training is applying incident command system, also allowing staff to play the roles in practical exercises.
We instituted that last year, and we've had over 200 of our employees go through that.
It helps you to put tactical objectives in place so that every responder knows what your objective is for that incident.
So when we have one of these emergencies, we just all come together. So about 72 hours out, the GEMA director will call all the agency heads and we'll start communicating, and then all our people leaning forward. As DNR and the state agencies prepare for upcoming storms, Georgians are also preparing.
With regard to Georgia's preparation, mandatory evacuation will go into effect tomorrow.
Doors and windows boarded up and sandbags piled high as many are choosing to get out of Irma's path.
The word of that evacuation has spread quickly.
As they're evacuating, we try to give as much information as we can where the shelters are.
We have 60 state parks and historic sites throughout Georgia. So during Hurricane Irma, Parks Properties housed approximately 11,500 individuals. And then we had an additional 479 that were dry camping with us. So that came close to 12,000 individuals staying at our sites. As far as preparing those shelters, the park managers contacts the local emergency management agency for food items, for bottled water, for diapers, or hygiene products. Make sure that they're fully stocked, clean, functional. One provision that we have found very important is to be able to take care of their pets. All those facilities become pet-friendly.
When you're dealing with, these storm systems that are massive in nature and statewide in perspective, and then the day comes and the event's here. The flooding along the coast was worse than Matthew, the 1 year prior. We have maintenance facilities, shops, houses, homes, all flooded. Hurricane Irma not only reshapes a lot of your infrastructure, but it reshapes the landscape itself. Where dunes that were 20, 30 feet oceanside were now just cut and eroded away, and you have a new shoreline. So you have docks that are dangling in the air. It's the scene down there after one of these events is amazing, but Mother Nature, as always, teaches us so many different valuable lessons.
GEMA prioritized the reentry effort, but we're the tip of the spear. We send our debris teams, they're 8-man teams. The equipment we use through reentry is a lot of the same equipment we use on a daily basis. We use our air assets, our helicopters. Pilots get up to assess the damage from the air and direct our teams where they need to be. So we have big trucks, our law enforcement section. Every ranger has a 4-wheel drive, a boat, chainsaws, ropes. So we clear from white line to white line, getting the roads passable and just cover as much ground as we can, usually working 12-hour shifts.
Your local police department, sheriff's department are your first responders there on the scene. So if it's water or woods, our officers are always the best to respond to that.
One of the greatest things that I saw throughout any of our response effort is a teamwork.
I'm really blessed that I lead an agency that has troops that are so flexible.
Thank you for our personnel, the department as a whole. Even though we've got different divisions, collectively we come together and work seamlessly as one department.
I wonder how many of our committee members were trying to identify where we've been along the coast, because I know most of us Georgians head to the coast, and I was surprised how many areas I recognized. And
yeah, and
so
looked a little different after the hurricane.
It did. It did. Go ahead.
No, I just want to say again how proud I am of the DNR staff for the way they step up, and we hire them to be biologists and technicians and law enforcement people, but in these storms we all come together. So, Madam Chair, that concludes my remarks, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you. We'll have time for a couple of questions, and we'll go to EPD,
Okay.
and then we'll circle back if we have time. But will you take a minute and just introduce some of your staff that you have
Sure
here
will.
and different division heads?
Doug had a bunch of meetings today, so I'll introduce Carl from CRD, and then we have James from Parks, then we have Mark Whitney from Wildlife Resources, and Dave Crass from Historic Preservation Division. Terry West is Deputy Commissioner. I should have started with him, sorry, Terry. And then y'all all know Wes Robinson. He's the one that runs in and out of your offices 24 hours a day. He's our legislative and public affairs person. And Eddie Henderson, our colonel from law enforcement. I think that's it. I see Thomas Farmer back there, but I mean.
Thank you. And we'll have just a brief period of time for questions. And I already see Representative Hogan. So, and then I'll write your numbers down as they come, but keep your questions brief so we can give others a chance. Thank you,
Madam Chair. I was in Ireland watching Irma on my phone, waist deep around my house. Nothing I could do from Ireland. I appreciate your staff and everything they did in Glynn County. I've still got houses around me that nobody lives in. They were all flooded on Ocean Boulevard. That's the first time that we'd been flooded that I can remember, and I've lived on Ocean Boulevard 51 years. Matthew was nothing compared to Irma, but I'd just like to thank you for what y'all did.
I appreciate that. We were a little bit, if you can use the word lucky with Matthew, but Matthew came in at low tide, and Irma, everything was perfect for flooding at high tide and all.
To just piggyback a little bit on your statement, I know that emergency federal funds are slow to get to our areas that are in need. Can you just briefly explain what y'all are looking to do? I know there are abandoned vessels everywhere and docks repairs needed, and if you'll just brief the committee on that so we can kind of keep an eye on that. There might be areas where we can engage. Okay. Terry? Yeah.
Well, the federal funds we have the losses we're allowed to turn in. We have all turned them in for reimbursement through FEMA, but there is a lag in getting that money back. In the meantime, we've of course taken measures to repair our own properties as much as we can. Abandoned vessels, you mentioned that, Madam Chair. That is an issue that we're still working with down there. Looking for any assistance we can find through the Coast Guard, through FEMA, working with the local governments, but abandoned vessels have been an issue for a number of years, and this storm has just exacerbated it. So hopefully we're going to look for a permanent solution and ways to deal with those going forward from this.
Thank you.
One thing we did this year, and I'll give Carl credit for this over here. Carl's over all that dock permitting, for lack of a better term, and he stood up a 1-800 call center, and we couldn't permit every dock, but we had somebody manning the phones 24 hours to tell people the process, what they can expect, and manage expectations. And we got not overwhelmed, but it was a very, very well used system, and were able to get a lot of information out there. dock builders are gonna be busy for the next 10 to 15 years down there.
Thank you. And I think it was number 12?
Yes, Representative Thomas. And when a person thinks about the emergency preparedness and they think about rescuing, in my mind, I never just think about specifically the role that the department plays. And so I want to really say thank you, because really for first responders. And so so I just want to salute the work that you do. And the interesting thing about it, Madam Chairman, the first job, what we call real job I had was with the Department of Natural Resources.
Really?
Yes, I worked
Never
at
too late.
But yes, as a college student at Georgia State, my first job was up on the hill at the Department of Natural Resources. I worked in personnel and human resources. And so I know a little bit about the department, so I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your service.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And as always during the session and even after the session, they're available to us for questions. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Next we have EPD. And are you going to use the table? Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Rick Dunn. I'm the director of EPD. EPD is the division within DNR that's charged with protecting Georgia's air, land, and water resources through the administration of about 20 state environmental statutes and 4 federal statutes, including Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Water Drinking Act, RCRA. We regulate, of course, both public and private facilities in the area of air quality, water quality, hazardous waste, water supply, solid waste, surface mining, underground storage tanks, and others. I gave some slides there, just some background information, talk a little bit, and help you understand the way EPD is organized. I think that's on slide 4. We have 709 full-time employees, and most of those employees are divided among our 3, what we call our media branches, our air branch, our land branch, and our water branch. About 70% of our employees work in one of those 3 areas. We also have 6 district offices located in 7 cities across the state. We operate a laboratory out in Peachtree Corners, as well as you'll see a line there for administration. Those are our 43 employees that include HR, legal, IT, procurement, things like that. So a total of 709 employees. Most of our employees are located here in the Atlanta area. We're either across the street in the Twin Towers, or we have our air branch employees and some of our land branch employees are located in the trade port, which is down near the airport. I won't go over this, but on your slides, it's kind of interesting to me. I always talk about EPD by the numbers. It gives you kind of the scope of the things that EPD are involved in. I have it broken down by land, air, and water, and I won't talk about those, but it's kind of interesting to look and see the scope of EPD's work. I know this is not an appropriations hearing, but it's important to kind of go through, understand a little bit about EPD's budget. Our total funds budget is about $134 million. The largest portion of those dollars are what's classified as other funds. These are fees that we collect and we retain. Examples include the funds on every gallon of gas for those participants in the underground storage tank program. We have our inspection and maintenance fees in the 13-county area. Those emissions fees, we collect a fee from those to run that program. Title V, air permitting fees, and drinking water lab fees that support our lab work. So about 42% of our budget are these other funds that we keep and retain for our operation. About 30% is federal funds, and the remainder, about 28% or $38 million, are state funds that are appropriated by this body. I always like to say we collect a lot of funds. I talked about those other funds that we keep and retain for our operation. We also collect a number of funds I'll talk a little bit about later that we remit to the state treasury. And this is well over $20 million that we remit to the state treasury. We're appropriated out about $38 million. So if you net that out, I think it's a pretty good deal for the Georgia's general taxpayer and for the general fund as well. There's a slide there that shows EPD's expenditure history broken down by state, federal, and other funds. I won't talk about that, but it's just kind of interesting to look at our expenses over time. Next slide is a pie chart. that shows what we spend our money on. Most of our funds, almost half of our funds, are for personnel services to support those over 700 employees that I talked about earlier. That's about 47% of our expenditures, and about a third of our budget is for contractual services, professional services, engineers, geologists, cleanup sites, and things like that. Let me say a word about the trust funds. We have two trust funds, the Solid Waste Trust Fund and the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund. I'll talk about the Solid Waste Trust Fund at first. At EPD, we collect $1 for each new replacement tire sold in the state. We take that dollar that we collect off each tire and deposit it in the state treasury. Those funds are then in turn appropriated to the Solid Waste Trust Fund, which is a program in the DNR budget. We use those appropriated funds along with fund interest and revenue from fines to carry out the purposes of the Solid Waste Trust Fund. The purposes of the fund include scrap tire management. We have a scrap tire program that kind of manages scrap tires from cradle to grave, from when scrap tires are generated all the way to when they're disposed. We use those funds to clean up scrap tire piles, abandoned landfill care, and the enforcement of our solid waste rules. These funds, the Solid Waste Trust Fund, supports about 22 full-time employees. It supports cleanup activities, and it supports our program operation expenses. The scrap tire cleanups that we support, we can finance those directly. In other words, we will do the contracting out with a contractor to clean up a scrap tire pile, or we may clean up scrap tire piles through reimbursements to local governments. Currently, we are working with about 78 abandoned scrap tire sites. That's almost 250,000 scrap tires that we're estimating the cost to clean up is close to $1 million. And we'll be working through those scrap tire piles this year. We also have 54 sites on the enforcement list. Hopefully those won't go onto the abatement list. We're working with the property owners to try to get those scrap tire piles cleaned up. We started last year, and I think this is a great program. We've started supporting amnesty days through our counties and municipalities, where a county or municipality will offer its citizens the chance to bring in scrap tires. The county municipality will take those scrap tires and take them to an appropriate disposal site, and we will reimburse them for that cost. Last year, or so far, we've had 30 amnesty events, 13 right-of-way cleanups, 9 dump sites cleanups that collected over 175,000 discarded tires. Since the inception of the Solid Waste Trust Fund, appropriations have constituted approximately 63% of the money that we collect, and the Solid Waste Trust Fund will sunset on June 30th, 2019, so you'll hear a lot more about that next year. That next slide shows how we spend money in the Solid Waste Trust Fund. Again, most of the revenue coming in are from state appropriations. And then you can see the expenses there. The largest expenses are for personal services and for scrap tire abatement, those cleanup sites that I just talked about before. And that next slide just shows a history of the collections for the Solid Waste Trust Fund and appropriation. The second trust fund is the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund. The Hazardous Waste Trust Fund is associated with a 75-cent per ton tipping fee on waste deposited in landfills in our state. That's separate. You'll hear a lot about the minimum dollar tipping fee. This is a separate fee on top of that. That's not part of the dollar minimum tipping fee that gets a lot of discussion here. But we get 75 cents per ton tipping fees that are given to the state. The Hazardous Waste Trust Fund is supported by fees on companies that generate, manage, and store hazardous waste, as well as civil penalties. Just like the Solid Waste Trust Fund, we collect those fees, deposit it into the state treasury. Funds are then appropriated to the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund to carry out the program. We use these funds to clean up hazardous waste sites where the parties responsible for the contamination are unwilling or unable to clean the site up. We also reimburse through the fund local governments for the investigation and cleanup of leaking municipal landfills. We use it to provide emergency response, so if there's a spill, responding to that spill. Funds are used to oversee private party cleanups and to administer the program in general. Associated with this program is the HSI, or the Hazardous Site Inventory. This is a list of sites throughout the state where there's a known or suspected release of a hazardous substance above reportable quantities that has yet to shown they can meet cleanup standards. Currently, there's 528 sites on the hazardous site inventory. 64 of those sites are classified as abandoned. So it would be the responsibility of the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund to clean those sites up. And the estimated cost to clean up those 64 sites is currently $85 million. Very similar history, appropriations to the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund constitute about 65% of prior year collections. And for this fee, it's very important, it sunsets on July 1, 2018. So there was a bill dropped yesterday, HB 792, be carried by the governor's floor leaders to reauthorize the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund for another 5 years. Again, I won't go into detail in there, but there's some information for you on our Hazardous Waste Trust Fund spend plan. And there's the prioritization of abandoned sites that we are cleaning up during this fiscal year, and a slide talking about the history of Hazardous Waste Trust Fund collections and appropriations. I just included for your reference, you've probably already seen it, some information on the amended fiscal year 18 budget as well as the 19 budget. Basically, we have a flat budget like most other agencies in the state with very little changes. We have lots of interesting issues, challenging issues that I didn't talk about particularly, but we are certainly here at any time to answer any questions or have a discussion with you about those issues. I will just say, in terms of our staff that's here, we have Lauren Curry here, who's the Deputy Director, Jeff Cowan, who is the head of our land branch, but Karen Hayes is the head of our air branch, and Jack Capp is the head of our water branch. And so, Madam Chair, I will be happy to answer any questions or listen to any comments members may have.
We do have a few questions. Again, just press your buttons, introduce yourself, and we'll begin. So, number one. Who's that? Oh. All right. No question, correct? No. Okay.
Question.
Oh, you do? We're trying to get you. See now. Just tap your mic. There.
The little red light wasn't on. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Carla Drenner. I know this isn't an appropriation hearing. Just two quick questions, Madam Chair. The revenues that are generated from the Solid Waste and Hazardous Waste Trust Fund are what? What are the revenues that you generate to us as a state?
The amount?
Yes.
If you look on the slides there, for example, last year the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund, there's a little bar chart, collected just over $15 million. The Solid Waste Trust Fund last year collected just over $7 million.
And then we reappropriated back how much of that?
In 17 on the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund, I'm trying to recall the exact number, but it was over $12 million. It was actually a little over 100% of prior year collections. And the Solid Waste Trust Fund, in terms of appropriation, again, you can see it on that bar chart. I'll have to give you a ballpark here, but last year it was just over $3 million.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Number 18.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superfund sites.
Yes, sir.
Glynn County.
Yes, sir.
We've got probably more down there than anywhere else in the state. Could I get a update on what we're doing about them at some time? I don't know if you're prepared now, but
Jeff Cowan's here. It will take a while, but we'll be happy to sit down and talk about those sites.
Because Honeywell, I think, just got permission to start cleaning up the ICP site with the mercury. Blythe Island, the whole area was contaminated. When I was a county commissioner, we sued Honeywell for $25 million and collected the $25 million. But they're still not through with their cleanup on the Altamahaw Canal, the old historical site there. And then Hercules with toxaphene and so forth. So I'd like to get a report on where we stand on that so I can respond to my constituents about it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We'll be more than happy, Representative Hogan, to reach out and schedule
Thank you.
Thank you. That completes our questions. Oh, press your button. So. Okay.
One of the questions I wanted, when I think about the storms, and then they come up with how do we come up with the estimate as to how much damage has been done, and if we underestimate, how do we recover? How do we come out of that situation?
I'm going to have to defer that question to Commissioner Williams.
That's a lateral pass if I've ever seen one.
Well, it's mainly up to our facility managers of our properties all along the coast that are familiar, and we also have our engineering and construction unit is dispatched to do assessments, and in some cases we actually contract out for assessments on what damages are. All of that has to be turned in through our process through DOAS within time limits, and so it's an undertaking to get it together, but we've done so for all of those.
And more or less.
Direct. Another question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. The estimation that you've given has been adequate enough for you to replace and repair the damage that's been done when those storms come through?
Yeah, we still don't know what we'll get as a reimbursement, right? Because that usually they don't reimburse 100% on all things.
Okay.
So the terms of what we get reimbursed are yet to be known.
Okay.
But but we are the critical assets we have, of course, went ahead and repaired using the existing funds we can find to get them back up and going for the public.
Thank you.